This is a true crime podcast. It contains adult themes and content and may not be suitable for all listeners. Listener discretion is advised.
He said, "You know what this is?" I said, "Yeah, it's a razor blade." He said, "I got you at my mercy, don't you?"
And here, they were guards and I was a convict. And that's the way it was. You knew where you were.
He says, "I wish you would just learn to behave like ladies."
And he said, "If you draw any blood, I'll kill every man in there." So the man dropped the knife and turned to the other men that were with him that he had set loose out of the various cells and said, "Well, he means it. He'll kill us if we don't give up." So they gave up.
You do your own number, you do your own time. If you hear something, you keep it within yourself. If you see something, you're blind to it. I don't care if it's a killing, whatever. You just don't see it.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Behind Gray Walls. This is a podcast all about the old Idaho State Penitentiary and the men and women that were incarcerated here. My name is Anthony. I'm in the studio here with Skye.
Hello.
What are you talking about today, Skye?
Today I am talking about Alta McGee, who is... It shouldn't be funny, but somehow I find it very funny.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite stories.
Yeah,
here.
we'll get into it. She's kind of a fiery little thing, but
Yes.
Deservedly so. It's not. Yeah, we'll get into her in a little bit. Who are you talking about today, Anthony?
I'm talking about Robert Miller Earley, who came in a couple of times. He had quite the sordid past, and he actually even left his mark at this site in the cooler. So next time you visit, I'll explain all this. I'll have it up on our Facebook group. You'll know exactly where it's at. So the next time you can come check that out.
And just so you know, Anthony is trying to put together a tour based on inmate graffiti around the prison. And so that's why he keeps being like, I found this graffiti and it's this person. That's because he is so observant around the site, and he's found all these cool different places that people have carved initials or names. I think this is the third one in our podcast so far that has been based on someone, because you did Sandusky, you did William Howard Thomas, so this is the third one.
Yeah.
So that's why he keeps being like, his name is carved in this place.
Yes.
It's because he knows where all of it is.
Yeah. And if you come someday in the future, hopefully I will be giving these graffiti tours, and they're fascinating. All the individuals that left this graffiti, like, I just think that I'm going to come in for a small story, and then I find out about Charles Sandusky, who attempts to kill his wife from last season, and she ends up surviving, and he ends up getting killed by his very own son. So if you haven't listened to that episode, check it out.
Yeah.
It was a fun one.
It's good stuff.
Okay, so Robert Miller Earley, number 6693 and number 7135 is my inmate today. The sources I used, of course, the Idaho Daily Statesman, Inmate Files, both of them, and Ancestry.com, which, of course, is a huge source for us now. Robert was born on March 12th, 1924 at Garber, Oklahoma. He had two brothers. His father, John, was a well driller in the oil business, and his mother, Myrtle, was a housewife. And Robert stayed in Oklahoma until he turned 16, and he claimed he had a 10th grade education, which would kind of pan out. And he said that he basically dropped out of school that year and started working as a welder, and he made 95 cents per hour. Does that seem like a lot?
95 cents per hour in what year?
This would be about 1939. Just
I
before.
might say yes, just because it's out of the Great Depression, right out of it. And though we are heading into the war years, which is, but I'd say that's a pretty decent wage.
Any guesses on how much that is? What inflation would be today?
I'm going to guess like $13.50.
About $17 per
Oh,
hour he
wow.
was making as
Nice.
this like 16, 17-year-old
Wow.
kid who, drops out of high school, 10th grade. And his parents separate, which I think kind of contributed to this. His dad moves to Oregon, and his mom stays in Oklahoma. And around this time, about 16, he starts to get into trouble. And let's start with his first thing. So while living in Oklahoma with his mother around the age of 16, he gets arrested on June 22nd, 1939 for larceny. March 4th, 1940 for larceny of an auto. He steals a car.
Cool.
March 18th, 1940. So this is not even 2 weeks later.
Right.
Larceny of candy, and he's fined $20. Then May 5th, 1940, just a couple months later, auto theft, and he's given a 5-year sentence, but it's suspended. So basically, he's given probation.
Right.
They say, all right, if you don't break the law, if you don't get into trouble over the next, 2-3 years, you won't have to serve any prison time. Mm-hmm. August 26th, 1940, larceny of an auto. So
this is like a wide range of things that he's stealing. What was the very
candy?
So he went from just like normal grand larceny,
theft,
which is probably like money or something like that, to an automobile, to candy, to another automobile.
Yes. Yeah, and this is some teenage punk kid. So August 26th, he steals that other auto while he's on probation, so he gets sentenced to the penitentiary. He arrives September 21st, 1940 at the Oklahoma State Reformatory in Granite, Oklahoma. And interestingly, this prison is established by a woman named Kate Bernard, who's appointed the Oklahoma Commissioner of Charities and Corrections, and she's the prison's first warden. She's the first female warden in the United States, which is
Oklahoma.
Very fascinating. Yeah, and she traveled to Kansas because a lot of inmates were serving time in the Kansas prison, and she saw the conditions there, and she's like, we should start a new site that is about reforming individuals, because right now it's just tough, harsh treatment, and these men are coming out harder than they came back in.
Yeah.
But she did choose this area because the inmates were going to construct their own prison. Whoa, never heard of that before. But their prison is made out of granite quarried from the mountains.
Whoa,
there.
cool.
Yeah, and it's a fascinating prison. Most of it, of the original construction from about 1909, 1911, has since been demolished and repurposed.
Yeah.
So most of the buildings that are there now, because it's still active, were constructed in the 1950s.
Okay. Dang, that would have been cool. Did you find pictures of it?
I didn't.
Gotcha.
Dang it. I should have. I was just reading about the history, and I was like, this sounds just like Idaho.
Yeah, totally.
Wow. Anyway, Robert, he was well behaved in prison. Not really. Okay, so he lost 3 months and 12 days of good time after hitting an inmate with a gas pipe and tearing up his bunk and chipping through a cell wall. He's discharged from that prison at about age 19 on September 24th, 1943, so after about 3 years.
Wow, and he was 19, so he went in young. That's crazy.
Yeah, so...
Sorry, you said that. Having a rough go of it. Yeah. Okay.
So 2 months later, November 23rd, 1943, he's charged with grand larceny for another auto theft in Portland, Oregon. He had gone to visit his dad after being released. It was like, get out of the state, essentially. So he goes to his dad, steals another car. He's taken to the station for examination, and he's sitting in the county jail, and World War II is raging now. So the U.S. Army's starting to accept young men's service in place of jail and prison sentences. So Earley's like, oh yeah, of course, I'd love to fight for the country. So they truck him to this U.S. induction center for a physical, so he can join the Army and not go to jail or prison. He escapes.
Well, that's not gonna keep you out of jail or prison.
No. Exactly. So he's on the run, November 1943, and in January 1944, he commits a string of thefts in Idaho, beginning with a blue Buick convertible sedan that he hotwires in Boise. He drives it through town. He drives west towards Oregon and wrecks it on the outskirts of Caldwell.
Oh, jeez.
He lost control of the vehicle, swiped a telephone pole before crashing through a fence. Later that morning, a Caldwell police officer reported a series of items missing from his car, including a flashlight, 12 deputy sheriff badges, and 3 boxes of revolver shells. And it appeared that Earley had attempted to hotwire the police car.
Oh, gosh.
But the maze of ignition wires prevented him from being able to do it. So he just had pulled that box down, and wires were just going everywhere. I can't imagine this officer did not get, hazed the rest of his career for this.
Yeah.
The next evening, Earley broke into an apartment building in Caldwell while the residents were asleep, and there he stole $54.84 in bills and coins, an overcoat, a hat, a watch, food, and several other little items. And the police were called, and when night patrolman Ernie Mason searched the building, he found Early actually hiding in a closet in a room on the upper floor. And the officer pulled Early from the closet, dragged him down the steps, but he actually broke free from the officer's grasp, ran through the front door of the building, slammed it behind him, and the officer took off after him and actually ran into the door and fell backwards.
Is this a farce?
It seems like it, right? I can just hear the music, like,
Right, yeah.
yeah. So Robert is like way far ahead of this officer, and the officer makes it out the door. He actually slips and falls on the sidewalk, and while on the ground, he pulls his gun out, he unholsters it, and fires at Robert.
Whoa.
Misses both times. The bullets actually went through a window of this nearby business near this apartment building. And when the other officers arrived, they actually found blood stains along the route that Robert was taking. And so they think that, you must have shot him.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the next morning, police spot Robert attempting to hotwire another vehicle. And he darts off, just barely evading the officers for a second time. Wow. They investigate the vehicle. They find items from several recent burglaries. So not just the apartment, but several other ones in the area. So this guy just couldn't stop himself.
He's a real klepto.
Yes, yeah. They had the evidence, but not this young Robert. And finally, after 3 days of crime and 2 successful escapes from officers, the 19-year-old Robert Early was captured hiding in a Lutheran church in Caldwell. He's arrested without trouble, pled guilty to burglary in the first degree, and revealed to officers his past history of car thefts, and that resulted in a 3-year stint in Oklahoma, which we just talked about. And he arrived at the penitentiary 2 weeks after being arrested, on January 24th, 1944, and sentenced to from 1 to 14 years at the old Idaho State Penitentiary.
Now, I don't want to get ahead of myself because this may come up in the Bertillon. Does he say what the blood stains were from?
No, that was the thing, is I think he may have just cut himself or something while fleeing. Yeah, because I try to figure out if he got a gunshot.
It's not. I was gonna say it's not marked on his.
He has cuts. He has a knife cut on his left forearm. He has cuts on all over his hands, and he has a gash across his head. So, yeah, but there's no mention of any gunshot wounds. Huh. Yeah, but the officers, they were all like, this guy he's a wounded animal. Like, let's just follow his tracks. And, and then the blood just kind of stops. So
weird.
Yeah. So
that's crazy.
I'm guessing in fleeing, he probably cut his hand or something along those lines. And it was just a little bit of blood that.
Wow, that's so interesting.
Out. Right. Yeah. So his intake papers describe him as a husky, brown-eyed, red-haired welder with numerous cuts on various parts of his body, as I just mentioned. He's 5'9" tall and 150 pounds. And the warden contacts the authorities in Oklahoma and the FBI and discovers a history of car thefts and disorderly conduct in and outside prison walls. And, while serving at the reformatory, the warden gets a whole write-up about the gas pipe incident. And his stint in the Idaho State Penitentiary wasn't much different. He spent much of the latter half of 1944 in solitary confinement, which would have been Siberia or the cooler at this point. And during the summer, he was caught taking a tablecloth from the laundry, which landed him in the cooler between July 27th and August 7th. So...
Why would you need a tablecloth?
Yeah. Okay. Maybe... betting? Maybe he was going to create something to escape.
Maybe he was practicing magic.
That could be.
I think that's it.
That's probably
it.
Yeah. But I mean, is it cool out here in July to August?
No, it is terrible.
It's currently, I think, in the triple digits. We are recording this right now in July.
July 25th. It's my brother's birthday.
Yeah.
Happy birthday, Davis.
Oh, hey, Davis. Happy birthday.
Davis. It's stupidly hot.
Yeah.
I hate it.
So that would be punishment, being in Siberia, being in that lockup during the hottest months. Yeah. 3 months later, he requests to stay in the cooler, which is probably for his own protection. They kind of use that as a protective custody. So if you're gambling and you owe somebody something, you could say, excuse me, officer, I'd like to, do I need to hurt somebody or can you just lock me up? Because I need some protection.
So then would they take special care as to who they put them in the cell with? Because the cooler, for those of you who haven't been out here, is is multiple group solitary confinement.
Group confinement, yeah, exactly.
So then they would have to be aware of who was in each cell, right?
Yes, I imagine so.
Okay.
I would hope so.
Right.
But it didn't seem to lessen or cool the yard down, because often there's a lot of tension on the yard, and you go into this, solitary confinement for a while, and then, people stop, they get off your back, and they have some other beef they've got going on. But less than a week after his release from this self-punishment, he actually gets into a fight with another inmate and is locked in the cooler for 2 days on November 12th. He spent a month in Siberia when he's caught in the kitchen without permission in December. So the next month, he's not supposed to be in there, and he's just wandering around. He just
was a bit snacky. It's not fair. I would be in Siberia all the time because I cannot stop eating at any point.
Yeah, that's probably it. He's
just snacky.
Yeah.
Wanted a little bit of a snack.
So, right. Despite all of his trouble, the parole board agrees to release him to Oregon authorities because he did escape from that auto theft after serving his year minimum sentence. And in May of 1945, the Oregon District Attorney actually drops the detainer against Robert, stating, "I will not dismiss the indictment. However, as I believe that the state of Oregon will be better off if the defendant remains away from it." So basically, if we get him here, he's going to cause more problems. So let's just forget it and move on, and hopefully he never comes back. He kind of comes back. He goes to the Kaiser shipyard in Vancouver, Washington, because this is still wartime. They need welders. And so he's hired on as a welder there. And he's given a conditional release June 1st, 1945. And avoiding trouble, he's given a full pardon exactly 1 year later. So he stays out of trouble from June 1st, 1945 to June 1st, 1946.
Just enough time to get pardoned.
Yeah, exactly. Of course, he couldn't stay away from this life of crime. Around midnight on March 4th, 1947. So just a few months later, he attempts to burglarize the Idaho liquor store in Boise, and he's caught by a police attempting to enter the building through an air conditioning shaft with the complete set of burglar tools in hand.
Oh, boy.
The prosecutor attempted to charge him as a habitual criminal, which would be a much worse sentence, probably could be up to life for that sort of thing, but settled for attempted burglary with a 7.5 year sentence. And he arrives at the Idaho State Penitentiary for the second time on March 31st, 1947. He stayed out of trouble. His life was great. They released. No, that didn't happen, of course. He gets into so much more trouble. So his temper and poor attitude land him in every form of solitary during his second prison term in Idaho. He's locked in his cell, which is what they call hard boil, for 23 hours a day in May 1947 for disobedience in the church. I wish they had explained further what this meant, but it could have been being loud or obnoxious or not being,
not being reverent in the church.
Yeah.
Okay.
His yard privileges were returned to him after a month of that. He kept out of trouble until February 1948, when he was hard-boiled for a month for writing a contemptible letter to the War Department. And I wish we had an example of this.
Yeah, that'd be amazing.
Yeah, and it didn't say anything.
Well, this is
more
48, right? So it's post World War II, pre-Korea.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So I don't know if it was something to do with the shipyard or if, he was signed up for the draft. I found his draft card and everything, and I couldn't find anything that revealed what exactly this letter must have pertained to. But
that's crazy.
Yes, a month of hard boil for writing.
Well, and here's the other thing, is he has to know his letters are being censored and read. So that almost to me feels like he wanted to get caught, or he just was like super mad and he was like, I don't care if I get in trouble.
Yeah.
But also, I'm assuming that letter did not get sent. Ultimately.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, definitely not. Yeah. The prison authorities got it before it was sent out.
Right.
So.
And again, I don't know. It seems like a dumb move.
Yeah.
I get it if you're mad, but just why try to even send it? I don't know.
There was another inmate who actually wrote a death threat towards a president and tried to send that through the mail. And FBI actually had to come and investigate and interview him and stuff. So maybe we'll get to that story someday. I remember coming across this and being like, what? No. So in July 1948, Robert is locked in his cell indefinitely for his readiness to start trouble with a guard after he raised his fist in a boxing motion towards this guard.
But was it the old-fashioned boxing motion where they like their thumbs are in a weird place and they're like it's like go in a circular motion?
I think so.
Sweet.
Idle in his cell for nearly 4 months. And if you have come to the old pen and you've seen the size of these cells, imagine being locked in that indefinitely for 4
What house
months.
is it?
I'm imagining at this point it's probably 3 house. I'm hoping it's 3 house because it has plumbing.
Old, yeah.
Yeah, and none of the others have plumbing. And if you're, what a punishment if he's in anything earlier than 3 house.
Yeah.
So he's in his cell for 4 months. He's again insubordinate towards the number 2 house guard. So he was in number 2 house and was agitating. Yeah. And he was agitating other inmates, and he's sent to the cooler for further punishment. We can speculate that he etched his name and number into the door frame of the first cell in the cooler during his lockup. It's right as you walk into your left, that first cell, and it says Bob 7135 Earley, Earley. It's just faintly marked in there. And Yard Captain Talley reported that Robert's attitude was poor and remarked that Robert was just plain no good, should do time and plenty of it. So, June 1948, Robert's father writes to Warden Clapp stating that his son should be sent to the sanitarium because his son was writing about mental issues he was having. Clapp responded, "When he advised you that he was in poor health, he gave you the wrong advice." There is absolutely nothing wrong with his health. The only thing the matter with him is that he wants out of this penitentiary, nothing more. And Robert's mother writes 2 months later saying she still thinks he needs mental health treatment. I'm sure there's something wrong with his mind. But Clapp again responds, he is not getting along at the institution. His defiant attitude and utter disregard for prison rules and regulations keeps him in almost constant trouble. He is now locked up for misconduct and will probably be locked up for some time to come. There is little that you or anyone else can do to help him. He must first learn to help himself. There's little to be said other than this. When the time comes, if it ever does, that he makes up his mind to do the right thing in this world, wherever he may be, I think that his case is just about hopeless.
Whoa. Shoot. So this warden has like very little respect for him.
And Clapp is like my favorite warden. And so like,
listen, Clapp doesn't like people too, Anthony.
Man. But this seems to actually have helped Robert. So in August 1949, Robert's mother writes to Warden Clapp that Robert was worried about going into a solitary confinement again. And the warden responds that his attitude towards everything here is very poor, again, but that does not call for solitary confinement. There's nothing that you could do to help him if you were here. The only person who can help him is your son himself. It is not a pleasure for us here to have to lock an inmate up in solitary confinement, but there are times when it's necessary. So it's this, the compassion that Clapp has for this guy who's causing all kinds of trouble in the yard all the time. And
Clapp seems like a really like tough love sort of guy where like he is willing to give people, the inmates, respect and understanding that they're humans, but also like he still has that understanding that they are criminals and they have done something wrong,
right?
Which is, it's such a, you don't see that with wardens too often.
And it's under his advisement and under his rule as the warden here that we get all these different vocational and rehabilitative programs and even start to get like therapists and psychologists.
I was going to say, is it with Clapp that they start to get that sociologist that comes in and takes all their social histories?
Yeah, exactly. So Clapp was warden between 1944 and 1966. So he had 22 years
man.
as a warden, as somebody who's, dealing with inmates day in and day out. So he knew everything that these guys were going through.
Yeah, like how many thousands of inmates did he see? Because most inmates, were only here for a year or two.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
There's a lot.
That's cool.
Yeah.
We should do a survey to see like from 44 to 66, like how many people came through. That'd be
I actually have it. I wrote it in the foreword, but I can't recall the number right now. So in January 1950, Robert's locked in Siberia after another knife fight with inmates Horace Munger and James Miller. And there's no report about what occurred in the fight or any documented injuries, but he's locked up for some good time for that. And it didn't seem to affect his release. He's actually pardoned and left the Idaho State Penitentiary March 31st, 1950. He moves to his mother's home in Oklahoma and worked in a mine for a short time, but began having issues with his heart and lungs. And his mother managed a rental company and allowed Robert to loaf for some time until he recovered. Boredom and judgment from neighbors began to set in, and he said it got to where their attitude was unbearable. A person just looking at me wouldn't think I was handicapped because I wasn't dependent upon a wheelchair, crutches, or cane. So to them, I was an ex-jailbird, loafer, and plain no-good skunk. And this is a letter he writes to Warden Clapp, April 1953. So after his release, like, he's writing to the warden, he's doing his parole prerogative things. He talks about his travels after prison, his religious experience. And he says, Mr. Clapp, I had a strange experience while in the hospital. In there, I believe the Lord became a part of me for the first time in my life. At any rate, from the time I left Boise until I got into this present trouble, I was never arrested, never put in jail, or never even questioned by anybody concerning crime, etc. While he's in this prison hospital, he has this really strange spiritual experience, and I'll go into that a little bit more in a moment here. He stated that he started a family. He had a red-haired son that he named Mike Donnelly. Does that name sound familiar to you, Skye?
It does, because interestingly, there is more graffiti in that first cell of
Cooler.
Thank you.
Yes. Yeah. So
that's
if you,
him, huh?
So if you look down at the base where it says Bob Earley, if you look to your left, you'll faintly see Donnelly carved into the wall.
Now, did he do it there on purpose because he knew his dad's name was there, or was it just a coincidence that he was stuck in that cell of the cooler?
He named his son Mike Donnelly.
Oh.
And so Mike Donnelly actually served about over 20 years, between September 17, 1923 to July 8th, 1944. Murder in the first degree charge. And he carved his name into that wall. And part of the reason that we have Siberia, because originally it was just the cooler, was because Mike Donnelly led 15 other inmates in an escape attempt. And they actually pried off all the cell doors. And we're going to basically... They had two options. Do we hold the guards hostage and try to escape that way, or do we catch them by surprise? And they decided that they were going to try and bust out of there. They reefed up toilets. Originally, they had toilets in those cells, turned those into weapons, tied their blankets together. Mike Donnelly leading this thing. So like, okay, we're going to go. And then officers came in, broke it up, ended that
I don't know
attempt.
why they thought they could get away with that as a surprise. It's like that whole building is just concrete.
Right,
and like it is so, like, if you ever get a group of fourth graders in there, it is... like, you can't even hear yourself think.
Right,
and it's so, like,
so
I don't
loud.
understand how they didn't think that someone would hear them.
Right. Yeah. I'll never understand. So I think that Robert may have met Mike Donnelly.
Okay.
Because Mike, when he was finally released after like 20... So Mike's partner was Noah Arnold.
Right.
Who was executed at the site, I think, 1926. And so
That seems right.
they committed this murder together, but...
Noah Arnold, who's African-American.
Both of them were. But
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I thought
but
one was white.
Noah is the one who gets pinpointed as the one who pulled the trigger to kill the grocer and gets executed. So Mike, in all his time there, he starts to, towards the end of his sentence, actually starts to help other inmates. And after he's released, he actually came back and tried to help with rehabilitative programs and things. So I think, it's so interesting to me that Robert would he would name his son Mike Donnelly Early, and tell the warden this. Like, to name drop Mike Donnelly like this, it makes me think that he named him after that.
Right.
Anyway, that's just my thoughts on it. Anyway, so despite all his trouble, Robert speaks highly of Clapp. So, just this mutual respect thing. He says, I believe you would like to hear of how I did after I left Idaho, not because you've ever given me any personalized interest or anything, but instead because you were trying to rehabilitate men and not just to merely imprison them, and you no doubt would be interested in knowing how I made out. Give my regards to old Knothead Tally, and that's Captain Tally, and there are a bunch of oral histories about old Cap Tally, who's this jolly old yard captain who would like tease inmates, and he'd call everybody a knothead. Hey, knothead, what are you doing? Anyway, then he even writes ha at the end of that. Old Knothead Tally, ha. and tell him I say hello and ask him if he's ever found his Jack. So in all due respect to you and in thanks to you for all you've done for fellows like me and helping us to get a new start and outlook upon life. It's, it's funny. It's so fascinating to me when correctional officers and wardens and administrators get these letters, and it happens so often. These really, really nice, I know I did wrong, and you treated me like a human being.
Right.
And it's because of that I've changed my life and turned it around. And like when I read that oh man, it was like almost made me tear up just to learn so much about this guy. And it's not the only correspondence with Clapp. In April 1959, so he's been released for almost 10 years, he sends a letter to the warden asking the name and address of the priest that administered to him while he was hospitalized in 1949. And Robert wrote, "Mr. Clapp, I cannot reveal at this time why after 10 years I would want this information." And Clapp responds, "I'm unable to advise you for sure who the priest may have been. The bishop who was here at that time as Bishop Kelly passed away in 1955. In fact,
Bishop Kelly is in Bishop Kelly High School?
I believe so. In fact, the priests who come out to this institution and care for the Catholic inmates change so often, I find it hard to keep track of them. And I wish I could know more about this religious experience that he had that really seemed to change his life around and change his thoughts on himself, because I feel like that's really what changed him.
Yeah, absolutely.
From there, I found a couple records on Ancestry that I think are Robert Miller Early, and one, he married this woman named Trudy Lowmaker in Ector, Texas, in February 1983. So he's 58 and she was 41 years old, and it seemed that she filed for divorce October 1990. And then if this is him, the dates match up, the place of birth and everything else match up. I believe that Robert died at the age of 75, August 24th, 1999 in Clark, Washington.
Wow.
But just like most of these records, it's so hard. He had quite the life, and I'm really curious about Mike Donnelly Early, if he's still around. I looked and looked for any record of him and was unable to find anything. So if anyone knows him and would like to reach out and connect, I'd love to share his father's documents with them. And Whew.
Well, very cool, Anthony. I didn't know. I mean, there are 13,000 men that are bound to be men I don't know, and I did not know his story at all. So thank you so much.
Yeah. He's not a huge name, and it was just literally off of that graffiti, and I went, okay, Bob Early, really? Who is this?
Yeah.
And then I just like everybody, there's such a profound story behind this individual.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
He's a complicated character. And
Absolutely.
Please like and follow our Facebook page, Old Idaho Penitentiary. From there, you can connect with us directly by joining the Behind Gray Walls podcast group, where you can find the mugshots of the inmates featured in today's episode, supplementary images of the penitentiary, and discussions between group members. We'd love to see you there.
If you like the podcast, please consider making a donation. You can do that by going to store.history.idaho.gov/donation.aspx. Be sure to click the Behind Gray Walls podcast tab on the left side of the page.
Nice,
Well,
Skye.
unlike me not knowing your story, you do know my story, but I'm hoping that you don't know quite all the details. Also, if I sound very weird when I am speaking, I just had a cavity filled and half of my face is numb, but it's just now the feeling is starting to come back.
Oh, is that what's
it
up?
Feels my face looks very weird.
No, it's fine. It's fine.
It's because I'm finally getting feeling back and it feels very strange. All right. So I am talking about number 1464, Alta McGee. She is in for assault with a deadly weapon. I kind of love her story. Like I said, she's a bit of a firecracker.
Yes. She looks like it too.
She does. This is kind of, I kind of want to say like kind of one of the last old Westy sort of like crimes, because after this it gets a little bit more sophisticated. But yeah, so I just love it. So good. So sources. all usual ones. Inmate file, Ancestry.com, Idaho Daily Statesman articles. There are articles on the Library of Congress chronicling America, but they're actually just copies of the Daily Statesman, similar to, the way the Associated Press does, where, each newspaper just sort of picks it up. There are also, I did use a little bit of Wikipedia, again, checking sources and making sure the sources are accurate. And then there was another publication, and it's from a club called the Boise Commercial Club. I'll get into that in just a sec. But I did use a little bit of their publication. So Alta McGee was born in Nebraska between 1871 and 1873. The sources vary a little bit. Her headstone says November 10th, 1871. This date seems the most likely because she enters the prison in September 1908, and she says she's 36 years old. So that means her birthday wouldn't have come yet. Her birthday, she would have been 37 in 1908, which then makes it match up with 1871. So most likely that she was born in 1871. Her parents were John and Emma Schaefer. She had one older brother named William, who was born in 1869. So he was, only 3 years older than her. One source I found said that he was 8 years older, but I think it's more likely 3. Some of the later census I found, they are living together and there's only 3 years between them. Her parents separate. They probably divorced by the time she's 3 because I couldn't find a death record for John. I think he actually lives into the 30s or 40s. So I think it's more a divorce. And I also think it's more of a divorce because in the 1880 census, Alta and William are living with their mother and a stepfather named Adam Bell, also their maternal uncle, George. Interestingly, though, in the later census, Emma, who was married to Adam, she eventually starts to go by Emma Schaefer again. So whether that means that she and Adam also divorced and it's a really nasty divorce, I don't really know, but she ends up dying and being buried under Emma Schaefer. So that's kind of interesting. According to Alta's intake form, she attended school for 8 years, which probably means, 6th, 7th, maybe 8th grade, probably not even quite that high. I mean, it may even, so it probably wasn't real long. She left home at 15 years old, probably worked for a couple years. At some point, she does get married, but I could not find any details on this first marriage. There may not have even been a marriage, but the reason I say there probably is because she has a daughter who's born either in 1888 or 1891 in Chicago. Her daughter's name is Monty Sano Powers.
Wow.
Yeah, it's quite the name. Monty, and then her middle name is Sano, at least according to one census record.
Wow, that's great.
So I started looking for Powers, the last name Powers, because when she's younger, she's listed in the newspaper as Monty Powers rather than Monty McGee or anything like that. But I couldn't find Alta Powers. I couldn't even find because sometimes on birth certificates or marriage certificates it'll list both the parents. Yeah. She did have marriage records, but there wasn't an image. They were from Washington, and Washington tends not to put images on their records, which is sort of disappointing, but oh well. So that's all that could be found about her potential first marriage. She does also have a son named Albert. He's born in Montana around 1893 or 1894. He uses throughout his whole life the last name Waddles, which is it's Alta's mother's maiden name, so his grandmother's maiden name. So it's possible that she's not married when she gives birth to Albert. Maybe she took on the family name to sort of rid herself of this former marriage if it went really bad. This is where things get a little bit complicated, especially in those records, because you don't know, especially when they're using familiar names. Is it on purpose? Does it come down to the fact that he's possibly born out of wedlock?
Is he raised by her mother?
As far as I can tell, he lives with her.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Wow, interesting.
Because there is a census record that she actually uses the last name Waddles as well.
Oh, okay.
So, so it's kind of interesting. I looked for birth records or marriage records that would have his father's name on it. There's nothing to be found there. In 1905, she's living in Great Falls, Montana. Her son is probably about 9 years old. She marries John L. McGee under the name Alta Bergner. Again, this is possibly a clue as to a first marriage or another marriage, but she could not be found with any other records under the name Alta Bergner. It could maybe even be just like whoever wrote it had really bad handwriting. But Bergner isn't really close to Schaefer, which would have probably been, or Powers. It's even further away from Powers. Yeah. So I don't know. I don't know what this name is about. John may have been a railroad worker or a miner. I think he was more of a railroad worker in Great Falls, Montana, but I think eventually he sort of becomes a bartender. The family relocates briefly to Wallace, Idaho. Now put a pin in that for a little bit. And by 1907, Alta, her 2 kids, and John moved to the Boise area. Actually, they just moved to Boise, not even in the area, just Boise. I've made it a goal. I want to talk a little bit more about the towns, because though we do have a lot of Idaho listeners, I think we do have some outside of the state. And when we say like, oh, Twin Falls, like we know where that is. Like
knows
Blackfoot, everyone knows where that is, but not everyone does. And, all these towns have really interesting histories. So I'm going to try to be a little bit more purposeful in that. And if we've already covered that town, then I want to try to find sort of what's going on at the time of the crime. So Boise in 1907, it's a burgeoning city. It's been a city for about 40 years now. The 1900 census, its population was listed as 5,957. But by the 1910 census, the population is 17,358. So it is booming. Oh, so you raise the population by 12,000 people. So by 1907, this is probably just an estimate, probably around 15,000 or so. So, this is not a small town anymore. Railroad and mining have sort of died out in the area. It's starting to become an area for like well-to-do visitors, politicians. It is the capital, the state capital. And so it's getting pretty big. Newspapers are filled with social columns of the wealthy around town. This is just an example of some of the things that get in the personal mentions. This is actually on July 3rd, so it is actually the statehood 1907, and it's right before the 4th. So there's a lot of mentions of like they're in town for the 4th of July.
Visitors,
Yeah, so there's, for example, Mrs. Jacob U. Nance and her sister, Miss White, will leave for Portland and Seattle today to spend the rest of the summer visiting friends. H.A. Partridge of Nampa was a visitor in the city yesterday. Mr. and Mrs. E.M. Kirkpatrick of Parma and Mrs. C.W. Atteri of Pontiac, Illinois are guests at the home of Mr. and Mrs. C.B. Hurt for the 4th. These are the sort of things that get in the personal column. Like, these are names that supposedly everyone knows around town.
Yeah. They have a lot of friends. So come visit. You know where they're staying.
Yeah, like the family of Bishop Fernston have departed for a visit in Virginia. The comings and goings of wealthy and popular people are, this is a very common thing that you'll find in Boise newspapers in the early 20th century. The current Idaho Capitol building would actually not be built for another 5 years. Yeah. So even though it is the Boise Capitol, the Capitol building that we know of, the first phase of it isn't built until 1912. The Julia Davis Park near downtown, which is also right across from the museum, get a plug in there, it actually opened in 1907. So it's a brand new park. And then this is the Boise Commercial Club had been established the year before. And from what I can tell, because I don't think it exists anymore. From what I can tell, it seems like a club kind of created to create buzz or PR for the city. It's like a place where people can like be excited about the town and like tell other people how cool it is.
Interesting. Okay.
So the first publication, their very first publication, comes out in 1907, and this is how the publication is advertised. This is like the thing on the back of the book to get you interested. So it says, "These pages were written to induce you to cast your lot with us in this El Dorado of the West. Fill not your ears with wax. We invite you to no enchanted land where sirens sing, but to a city and a country that are not only fair as a poet's dream, but replete with opportunity for you to win not only a living, but where a reasonable degree of effort, industry, perseverance, and foresight will, in a reasonable time, win a modest fortune. Be assured of this. Nothing herein is exaggerated. Care has been taken to keep within the limits of sober fact." I mean, that's the greatest description of Boise maybe ever. The El Dorado of the West.
The El Dorado.
Oh, it's so good. A city and country that are not only fair as a poet's dream, but replete with opportunity. So, people are really digging Boise. This is what's going on in 1907. But even with all this business and the politics, it is still a bit of a Western town. There's still horses and buggies. There's still vigilante justice. The newspapers that I was looking at, they're full of mining strikes. And Harry Orchard, his
trial.
His trial just been the year before.
Yeah.
This is still sort of a lawless Western town every once in a while. So keep this in mind. Back to the McGees. The McGees' marriage seems pretty troubled. John is, he seems like not a great guy, because he starts, and this dates my soul a little bit, because most people my age don't use this, but since I've watched so many old movies, I use the term stepping out. So he starts, you know what that means?
Just like cheating or
yeah, I'm so old,
having affairs.
Like I wrote it and I was like, oh, I'm 80. So he starts stepping out with other women and flaunting them in front of Alta. Wow. He actually claims that Alta stepped out on him first because the couple hadn't been living together, and so he was like, well, I figured if she was out with other men, then like she can't get mad at me for stepping out with women. But it's a little bit different, because he is literally driving these other ladies like past her house.
Yeah.
He is antagonizing her
horse
on purpose.
And buggy.
Yes.
With a date in
like
front of his
driving
wife.
by like, hi Alta, and like she's just supposed to stand there and just take it. Ugh. I guess maybe I get mad. So this is according to her own account during trial. John and a lady were driving by one time, and Alta horsewhips the women. So presumably, this is how I imagine it. There's no detail in the newspaper. And by the way, all of this is from one newspaper article in particular. It's from May 7th, 1908. It's a really good article. It gives you a lot of detail. And it seems to be it's not super biased the way that sometimes these are. How I imagine this horsewhipping going is him driving by, flaunting this woman in her face, her running out into the street, grabbing the lady by the hair, pulling her out of the carriage, and just like horsewhipping her.
Wow.
I don't know if that's actually happened, but that's how, I don't know how else you would do it, because I don't think they'd like get out of the carriage and like come up to the house or anything.
I feel like he would try to, he would see Alta running out the door with a horsewhip, and they would have been like, oh, go, go.
Right.
Yeah. And then Alta
or he just
whipping the side of it.
Man, so clearly she's a little spicy. She's starting to get pretty fed up, I think.
Right. And I'd say reasonably so.
Yes.
Like, he's doing it so blatantly, and it gets worse.
Yeah. So on May 4th, 1908, John drives by with a Mrs. Avis Kellogg, and he actually drives by like multiple times. Like he drives by, turns around, drives by again. This is all to antagonize her. There is no reason for him to be continually driving past her house with Mrs. Kellogg. And Mrs. Kellogg apparently even called Alta on the telephone and says she wanted Alta to understand that she was out riding with John. I'm out riding and I'm with John. Just wanted you to know. Just wanted you to understand that. And so she's just like, they're just rubbing salt in this wound.
And does he go home that night? And
I don't think they're not living together.
Okay.
So because
that's good.
Monty, who again is her daughter, and several neighbors actually testify that John spent several nights like prowling around outside Alta's house just to like bother her.
Yeah.
And so they're not living together. And so thankfully he's not coming home and being like, hey honey, how was your day? And she's like, I hate you. So
this would be a different story if that
So I don't think it would be assault with a deadly weapon. It would be murder.
No, yes.
So finally after this, Alta has just officially had it. She is done, and I cannot blame her. So she goes to a local livery, she rents a carriage and driver, and she goes on a drive, and she has a pistol in her lap. So she spots John and Mrs. Kellogg in front of the Pioneer Saloon / cigar store on Main Street, where John works as a bartender. He supposedly sees her and calls out, and I'm assuming he's pointing to Mrs. Kellogg as he's saying this, because he says, there's one I can take out riding and you're not game to horsewhip. Oh. And she says, I'll show you I'm game for anything with you. Oh. Pulls up the pistol, boom, 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 shoots 3 shots at him. And this is across like a crowded sidewalk. This is Main Street in downtown Boise. Shoots 3 shots at him, which I love that she is so feisty.
Yeah.
I'll show you. I'm game for anything with you.
Game
boom, boom, boom. So good. So 2 supposedly hit the building way above his head. And this leaves some to wonder, like, did she miss those on purpose to scare him?
Yeah.
She actually says that she tried to hit him all 3 times, but just missed. Just missed him all 3 times. She actually hit a cigar case inside the store. So a shot went through the window, and it says it was in the back of the store. So it went through a window, traveled all the way to the back of the store, and hit a cigar case.
Jeez.
During her trial, she admits later that she might have been sorry if she'd actually hit him if he was by himself.
Yeah.
But since he was with Mrs. Kellogg, she would not have regretted if she'd hit both of them. Like, she was so fed up.
Wow.
And I can't say I blame her. Like, I would be so upset if my husband had been flaunting this woman in front of me, and this woman had been flaunting herself, like her relationship with my husband in front of me. I just don't blame her. Yeah. So understandably though, you can't just go shooting at people no matter what. So she is arrested for assault with a deadly weapon. She pleads not guilty. So she does have a trial. During the trial, she sort of tries to backtrack, and she tries to claim that she shot at him because he was trying to involve her in a blackmail scheme to get money from prominent citizens of Boise and other Idaho towns. So one proposed victim they actually name by name. His name is Angus Sutherland. He is, quote, a well-known peace officer of Wallace, for whom John had apparently worked. They also try to blackmail another unnamed Spokane man who was a friend of Alta's. So the plan is to get men alone with Alta and basically try to make them make advances toward her, make her be all flirty and whatever. So then when they do make advances, to blackmail them, tell their wives, tell their friends, tell their politician buddies, whoever, and extort money from them for their silence, basically. She tried to claim that this was her real motive, that she, didn't want to have any part of it, and he kept pestering her for it, and so she shot at him to try to make him stop. But the prosecution, makes it pretty clear she was shooting at him because, she was ticked off at him that he was flaunting this woman in front of her. The jury deliberates for 18 hours, which is a very long time.
Gosh.
And they find her guilty of assault with a deadly weapon, and she is sentenced to 10 months at the Idaho State Penitentiary.
Wow. Any idea? This is a hard one. The jury makeup. Were there women on the jury? Do you know?
Well, let's see. So this is 1908.
Yeah.
Women have the right to vote in Idaho, but not the right to vote in the United States. I know that in Wyoming, the first woman juror was around this time, may have been a little bit earlier, but there is no national edict for women,
to serve.
That a woman, at least one woman, had to be on every jury.
Okay.
I would be shocked if there was any woman,
right?
But I couldn't tell. I didn't look, but I didn't look at every newspaper article. But as far as I can tell, it wasn't. All of that.
Yeah, I'm always curious about the jury pool in some of these trials, especially in, I don't know, this upper echelon individuals.
Yeah, I don't know. But I would, like I said, I would be surprised.
Yeah, just curious if it would mention that or...
No, not that I found. So here is her intake form. She is 36, as I said, when she comes in, born in Nebraska. Her legitimate occupation is a housekeeper. She doesn't list her height or her weight. This is early enough that some of the women they don't do that with. She has a light complexion. She has light hair and gray eyes. She has 2 children. She's married. Her father is not living, and then her mother is still living. She left her parents' home when she was 15. She had religious instruction and attended Sunday school in the Baptist church. She still considered herself part of that church. She had a common school education, as I said. She attended school for 8 years, and then she was a moderate drinker. The name and address of her nearest relative was Mrs. E.A. Schaefer in Boise. Before Alta entered prison, while she was out on bond, actually, she files for divorce against John on September 13th, 1908. Can't blame her.
Was that all John wanted this whole time?
Maybe.
Just divorce me.
It could be. I think he also just didn't like her. I just think they just didn't get along.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if maybe yeah, I don't know if maybe he didn't want a divorce and this was his way of just like flaunting his lifestyle in her face. I don't like John. I hate him, actually. So I'd care to know as little about him as possible. So she files in September. The courts grant Alta a divorce on December 8th, 1908. This is not the only good news that Alta receives in December. The governor, Frank R. Gooding, grants a respite on December 25th, 1908. It's a Christmas respite. And that respites are normally designed to be sort of a short break from prison. So a Christmas respite makes sense that like, oh yeah, you can get out for Christmas. Edna Eckersley is actually another one who got a respite. They actually call it something else for her. But basically she is able to get out to see her son who's ill in Oregon for Christmas, and then she's supposed to come back. She was granted respite, however, Alta was granted respite, however, until she was officially pardoned from her sentence on January 6th, 1909. It's a full and unconditional pardon, so she only served for 3 months. And I wonder how much of her release had to do with the motivation of this crime. I wonder if the parole board and the Board of Corrections, the Board of Pardons, could understand why she was shooting at this man. It's not because she's a violent person. It's not because she's this, criminal. She genuinely has just had it with what I kind of imagine is a psychological torture, to constantly have your husband like flaunting this woman in your face just because you guys aren't getting along, and having her call and stalking the outside of your house. Like, these are serious things that men, women, everyone gets in trouble for these days. There are laws now that stop this sort of thing because I think it's a form of abuse. At least that's how I see it. Yeah. And so I wonder how much the pardon board considered that while they were, looking into her case. And maybe that's why she got out early. I mean,
yeah, you endangered the public by firing these 3 shots. The circumstances behind the motivation are horrible. Yeah. So your punishment, 3 months, has been long enough.
Yeah, absolutely. So June 1909, she marries John H. Collins in Boise. John dies sometime between 1910 and 1920. Couldn't find a death certificate, but we do know that he dies because in 1920, this is when we find her living as Alta Waddles, living with Albert. They're actually running a boarding house in Pocatello. So they moved from Boise to Pocatello, and I think that's, I wonder how much of that is that she had this horrible thing happen to her in Boise. So let's just get out of town.
Yeah. Socially, it would be good for you to
definitely
get as far as ways
possible. So so they're running a boarding house in Pocatello. In 1924, she actually moves to Colorado and she marries a man named Bert Stoker. Bert dies in the late 1920s because by the 1930 census, she lists her marital status as widowed. In this same census, she is living with her brother William in Fort Collins, Colorado, possibly running another boarding house. She is still in Fort Collins, living with William in the 1940 census, and that is the last census that we have access to because the next one won't be released until the 1950 census won't be released until next year. So this is the last place we find her, and Alta McGee died on December 26th, 1953, 45 years and 1 day after her release from the penitentiary.
Wow.
She is buried in the Grandview Cemetery in Fort Collins. She shares a gravesite with her mother and her brother.
Oh, man.
Yeah, so it's a short story because it was early. There weren't a ton of details, but that is Alta McGee.
Yeah, Boise's first drive-by, would you say?
I don't know, because I don't know if there were men in for drive-bys, but I just love the idea of her just being like, I will show you, I'm game for anything with you, and just like pulling out this pistol. Like, I just imagine it very like Fargo film style, like Quentin Tarantino, like from the muzzle of the gun, like all dramatic and stuff. But yeah, and I think halfway through I started saying Alta, so like, Alta.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Weird. English language is weird.
I like it.
But anyway, so that is Alta McGee.
That's great. And you didn't follow John at all to see what ended up.
I think he died. Because I'm trying to think. One of her husbands, there was just the marriage record of her. It may have been him.
Any idea of how her other husbands died? Because that kind of always is a red flag to me.
Yeah. I mean, I think
Were they all just kind of natural?
I think,
and
I
just
think
happens to be...
if I remember right, at least Bert, or maybe I just imagine it because his name is Bert, but I think he was a little bit older.
Oh yeah,
and and really by the 1920s, she's in her 50s.
Mm-hmm.
But so he's probably in his 60s, 70s.
Yeah.
I always like to assume it's a death rather than a divorce because, despite all of my many jokes, I do believe in love a little bit. But sometimes it is a divorce. So anyway,
nice.
that's Alta McGee.
Wow. Well, great work, Skye.
Thank you.
I did not. All I knew was the flaunting of his mistresses through the streets, and then the 3 shots. And sorry, another question. Do you know which building or which blocks
I
it was?
tried to find so hard, but
I have too, because I was like, this would be so cool if I could tell family as I walk by.
And look, there's bullet holes right there. But honestly, at this point, it's probably been destroyed and rebuilt. And I wish, because I tried to find where this Pioneer cigar store was, but the thing that came up was Hannafin's, which as we know, played a little bit of a part in Ray Snowden's story. Yeah. I know you couldn't find pictures or anything. Yeah. I tried. But
no, I get it.
Main Street, it's got to be somewhere near the Eidenau Hotel, I would imagine.
Guess, yeah.
So probably around 8th, 9th, 10th.
There were several cigar shops all lined up. The Murphy Cigar Store, which you talk about with Patrick Murphy, and those were all right along Main. So
I bet around there somewhere.
Yeah. Oh, very cool. Well, good work.
Love it.
Again. Anything else?
No, I gotta go sit at the front
desk.
Yes,
all right.
Haley's probably real mad at me.
All right, Skye, we'll do your own time.
Do your own number.
We'll see you all next week. If you enjoyed Behind Gray Walls, please rate, review, and subscribe so others can find our podcast. If you're interested in more Old Idaho Penitentiary information and to see mugshots of the inmates featured in this episode, follow the Old Idaho Penitentiary on Instagram and Facebook. If you want to learn more about the Idaho State Historical Society and its other sites, follow ID State Historical Society on Instagram or visit history.idaho.gov. If you have a question or comment for the hosts, please email us at behindgraywalls@gmail.com.